Stop!
I won't fight you, son.
I back on this so back, yet don't back him! He's not back on man!
The night my son Darren turned our community center into a boxing arena, he smiled as a young fighter drove his fist into Grace Morgan's ribs. Grace was the quiet black janitor Darren had mocked for weeks, and everyone believed it was a harmless fundraiser match. I knew better when my son whispered to the fighter, and Grace was hit again. He never swung back. He only raised his arms, bleeding and silent, until I rushed toward the ring. My mother's silver locket snapped from my neck and slid across the floor. Grace stared at the initials engraved on it, looked at me and said, "Martha." "Sister." Darren's face went white. If family has ever broken your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. 6 weeks before Grace Morgan called me sister in front of a room full of strangers, I still believed my son was trying to protect me. That is the part I struggle to admit. At 63, I had already buried a husband, watched my only child become a father, and learned how quiet a house can feel after someone you love is gone. My husband Robert had been dead for almost 4 years by then. Some mornings, I still reached across the bed before remembering there was no one there to reach for. The one place that kept me from feeling completely alone was Morgan Community Center. The building sat on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, between an old church with peeling white paint and a small grocery store that sold more lottery tickets than vegetables. It was not beautiful in the way new places are beautiful. The bricks were faded. The front steps were cracked. The gym floor had dents from decades of basketball games, school dances, church dinners, and children running too fast when nobody was looking. But that building had heart. My mother, Helen Morgan, had started it nearly 40 years earlier. She had been a practical woman with strong hands, soft eyes, and no patience for people who said something could not be done. She raised me alone after my father left. She worked mornings at a doctor's office, evenings at a diner, and spent every spare hour raising money for neighborhood children who had nowhere safe to go after school. She used to say, "A community doesn't need a miracle, Martha. It needs one person willing to open the door." That center became her open door. By the time she passed away, Morgan Community Center had free tutoring hot meals for seniors twice a week, a small food pantry, summer programs, and a boxing room in the back where troubled boys learned discipline instead of trouble. After my mother died, the responsibility fell to me. I had worked as a school nurse for most of my life, so taking care of people came naturally. I knew the children by name. I knew which elderly neighbors needed their blood pressure checked and which single mothers needed a grocery bag slipped quietly into their car when they were too proud to ask. Still, after Robert died, I began to feel tired in a way sleep could not fix. That was when Derek stepped in. "Mom," he told me one Sunday afternoon, standing in my kitchen with his sleeves rolled up like he was ready to build something you have spent your whole life carrying everyone else. "Let me help you carry this." I remember looking at him and feeling so proud I could have cried. Derek was 39, then handsome in the polished, dependable way people trusted right away. He had a calm voice, a good smile, and the ability to make people feel like he had all the answers. He had worked in property management for years, so he understood leases, budgets, contractors, and all the things that made my head ache. At first, he was wonderful. He updated the center's website. He convinced a local bakery to donate leftover bread twice a week. He organized a new youth sports program. He even helped repaint the front office, choosing a warm blue that made the old room look brighter. Everyone praised him. "Your son is a blessing," people would tell me, and I believed them. But little by little, I noticed things changing. It began with paperwork. Derek would bring thick folders to my house, place them on my kitchen table, and say things like, "Just sign here, Mom." It's routine, or "This is only to keep the insurance current." At first, I signed without reading every page. I trusted him. He was my son. Then one evening, I saw a document with the words property transfer near the bottom. I looked up at him. "What is this?" Derek barely paused. "That's not what it sounds like. It's just part of a redevelopment proposal." "A redevelopment proposal for what?" He sighed the way people sigh when they think you are making things difficult. "For the backlot. The old playground area. A developer wants to build apartments. Upscale ones. It could bring money into the neighborhood and help keep the center afloat." I stared at him. "The playground." "Mom, nobody uses that playground anymore. That isn't true." "That isn't?" He leaned back in his chair. "You don't see everything. The center is struggling. The building needs repairs. We have staff costs, utility bills. You want to keep helping people, right? Then we have to be realistic." There was something in his tone that unsettled me. Not anger exactly, more like impatience, as though my mother's dream had become an inconvenience. "I'm not signing anything until I understand it," I said. His mouth tightened. "You don't have to act like I'm trying to trick you." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." That was the first time I felt a small crack form between us. After that, Derek began using words that made me feel older than I was. "You forget how expensive things are now. You don't understand how business works. You're letting emotion get in the way." Each time he said it gently, almost kindly. That was what made it worse. He never shouted. He never slammed a door. He simply spoke to me as if I were becoming someone who could no longer be trusted with her own life. Then, one Tuesday morning, Grace Morgan arrived. He came through a temporary staffing company Derek had hired for maintenance help. I first saw him in the hallway outside the gym, pushing a yellow cleaning cart past a group of children waiting for tutoring. He was a tall black man, maybe in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and shoulders that looked like they had once carried something heavy for a very long time. He wore a navy work shirt with his name stitched above the pocket. His movements were quiet and deliberate, not slow, careful. He did not try to charm anyone. He simply worked. Within a few days, the teachers liked him because he repaired things before anyone had to ask. The receptionist liked him because he always carried extra coffee filters. The children liked him because he listened when they talked, even when he was holding a mop. One afternoon, I watched a little girl cry because she had dropped her lunch tray. Before I could reach her, Grace crouched beside her, helped pick up the spilled food, and said softly, "Accidents happen. We clean them up and keep going." It was such a small thing, but something about it stayed with me. Derek did not seem to feel the same way. The first time he saw me talking to Grace, he walked over with a tight expression on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. Grace stepped back politely. Mrs. Lewis was asking about the leak in the supply closet. "I can handle it," Derek said quickly. Grace nodded once and returned to work. I looked at my son. "You don't need to speak to him like that. I wasn't rude. You were dismissive." Derek glanced down the hallway where Grace had disappeared. "Mom, he's temporary. Don't get too attached." The way he said it made my skin prickle. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded rehearsed. That same week, I found a sealed legal envelope tucked beneath a stack of invoices in Derek's office. I had only gone in to retrieve a file about the food pantry. The envelope was cream-colored thick and marked with the name of a law firm I vaguely remembered from my mother's old papers, Caldwell, Price, and Hart. My hand froze above it. Before I could read more, Derek appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. I turned slowly, looking for the pantry records. His eyes went straight to the envelope. Then he crossed the room, picked it up, and slid it into a locked drawer. "Those are private," he said. "Private from me. They're legal documents, Mom. You wouldn't understand them." The words landed harder than he seemed to realize. Or maybe he realized exactly how hard they would land. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "This center was my mother's life." Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And I'm trying to save it." At the time, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son was tired, stressed, and doing his best. I wanted to believe the strange way he watched Grace Morgan was nothing more than suspicion toward a new employee. I wanted to believe the locked drawer held paperwork I did not need to worry about. But that night, lying awake in my quiet house, I kept seeing Derek's face when Grace walked into the room. It was not the face of a man meeting a stranger. It was the face of a man who had been waiting for someone to arrive. 3 days after I found that legal envelope in Derek's office, he called an emergency staff meeting in the gym. Morgan Community Center had always been noisy in the late afternoon. Basketballs bounced against the old hardwood floor. Children ran through the halls with backpacks half-zipped. Somewhere near the kitchen, someone was usually arguing about coffee or paper towels. But that afternoon, the building felt strangely still. Derek stood at the center of the gym with a portable microphone in one hand and a large banner behind him. The banner showed a pair of boxing gloves and bright red letters that read "Fight for the Future." Staff members gathered in folding chairs. A few volunteers stood near the back wall. I sat in the front row beside the tutoring coordinator, Mrs. Palmer, who had worked with my mother years ago. Derek smiled at everyone with that polished confidence people always admired. "I know this community center means something to all of us," he began. "It means a safe place for kids. It means meals for seniors. It means support for families who need it most." A few people nodded. Then he lowered his voice. "But the truth is, we are running out of time." The room became silent. Derek clicked a remote, and a projection appeared on the gym wall. There were charts, red numbers, maintenance estimates, utility bills, and a photograph of the old backlot behind the center. "The roof needs repairs," he said. "The plumbing is outdated. The HVAC system is barely holding together. If we don't make major changes soon, we could lose everything your families have worked so hard to build." I looked at the numbers, trying to understand them. They seemed serious, too serious, but something inside me resisted the panic Derek was creating. The tutoring rooms were full every afternoon. The food pantry line stretched around the block on Thursdays. The youth basketball league had more children signed up than we could comfortably fit into the gym. Donations had been slower than usual, yes, but not non-existent. I had seen real hardship in my life. I knew what a place on the edge of closing looked like. Morgan Community Center did not feel like it was dying. It felt alive. Derek pointed toward the image of the back lot. "A local development company is interested in purchasing this section of the property," he explained. "They would build mixed-income apartments, and the sale would give us enough money to repair the center, modernize the building, and secure its future." Mrs. Palmer raised her hand. "What happens to the playground?" Derek gave her a sympathetic look. "We would replace it eventually." "Eventually?" she asked. "It is a difficult decision," he said smoothly. "But sometimes we have to sacrifice something small to save something bigger." My stomach tightened. That playground was not small. It was where my mother had held summer reading circles under the shade of the maple tree. It was where Robert had spent weekends repairing the swings when our son was little. It was where children whose parents could not afford summer camps played until dark. Derek looked directly at me. "Mom has always taught us to put the community first," he said. "And I know she understands that this is our best chance to protect the center." Every face in the room turned toward me. He had not asked for my opinion. He had placed me on a stage. I forced a smile. "I understand that we need to review all our options." Derek's expression barely changed, but I saw something flash behind his eyes. Disappointment. Or warning. After the meeting ended, he caught up with me near the front desk. "You could have supported me more clearly," he said under his breath. I said, "We need to review the options. You made me look uncertain." "No, Derek. I made it clear that I am not signing away part of this property because someone puts red numbers on a wall." His jaw tightened. "You keep acting like this is personal." "It is personal. Your grandmother built this place, and I am trying to stop it from collapsing. Then show me the full financial records." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he gave a short laugh that did not sound amused. "Mom, you don't understand how these things work." There it was again. That careful little sentence meant to make me feel foolish. I looked at him. Maybe I don't understand everything, but I understand when someone is trying to rush me. I walked away before he could answer. Later that evening, I went toward the old boxing room at the back of the building. The room had a faded blue mat, a speed bag that had been patched more times than I could count, and a ring with ropes worn smooth by decades of use. My mother used to say, boxing gave angry boys a place to put their pain without letting it destroy them. When I stepped inside, I found Grace Morgan, kneeling beside a loose floorboard near the ring. His work shirt was damp with sweat. A toolbox rested beside him. He was carefully securing the board so nobody would trip over it. "You're still here?" I asked. He glanced up. "Just finishing this before the kids come back tomorrow. You could leave it for maintenance." Grace smiled faintly. "I am maintenance." I could not help smiling back. Then I noticed a teenager sitting on the edge of the ring. He was thin, maybe 15 or 16, with his hood pulled over his head and anger written all over his face. I recognized him as Malik Turner. His mother had been coming to the food pantry since her husband was laid off. Malik had gotten into trouble at school twice that year for fighting. Grace looked at him. "You want to hit the bag?" he asked. Malik shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "It matters if you want it to." The boy stared at the floor. "I got suspended again," he muttered. Grace nodded slowly. "You hit somebody?" He said something about my mom. And what did hitting him fix? Malik's face hardened. "Nothing." Grace stood and picked up a pair of old boxing gloves from a shelf. He handed them to Malik. "Put these on." Malik looked confused. "Why?" "Because sometimes your hands need somewhere safe to put what your heart is carrying." The boy slipped the gloves on. Grace held the heavy bag steady while Malik threw punch after punch. At first, every hit was wild, angry, off balance. Grace did not correct him right away. He just waited. When Malik finally stopped breathing hard, Grace said, "You got strength, but strength without control is just another way to hurt yourself." Malik wiped his face with the back of his glove. Grace continued, "A strong man is not the one who hits hardest. A strong man is the one who knows when not to hit at all." Something in the room shifted. Malik looked at Grace for a long time, then nodded. It was such a simple moment, but it stayed with me because it was nothing like the man Derek had been quietly describing. Derek had hinted that Grace had a temper, that he had issues, that we should be careful around him. But I had just watched Grace speak to a hurting boy with more patience than most adults I knew. The next morning, I was in my office going through old donation files when I heard a soft sound behind me. Not a knock, more like someone catching their breath. I turned. Grace stood in the doorway. His eyes were fixed on the framed photograph hanging above my filing cabinet. It was an old black and white picture of my mother, Helen Morgan, standing in front of the community center on opening day. She was younger then, maybe 35, wearing a simple dress, and smiling as if she had just won something larger than money. Grace looked as though the air had left his body. "Grace," I said quietly. He did not answer at first. Then he stepped closer to the photograph. "That's your mother?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Helen Morgan." His throat moved as he swallowed. "Was she ever in Cleveland?" he asked. "When she was young." The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said slowly. "Before I was born, I think. She worked there for a few years." "Why?" Grace's eyes met mine. For one brief second, I saw something raw there. Grief, fear, recognition. Then he stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was none of my business." "Grace, wait. Did you know my mother?" But he shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. She reminded me of someone. He turned and left before I could ask another question. I stood alone beneath my mother's photograph, staring at the doorway Grace had disappeared through. And for the first time, I wondered whether the secrets inside Morgan Community Center had begun long before Derek ever touched a single piece of paper. After Grace asked about my mother, I could not stop thinking about the look on his face. It was not simple curiosity. I had seen people look at old photographs before. They smiled, remembered someone maybe asked a question out of politeness. But Grace had looked at my mother's picture as though it had reached across time and touched something inside him that still hurt. For 2 days, I considered asking him about it again. But then, Derek began planting seeds. That is the only way I know how to describe it. He did not make one dramatic accusation. He did not stand in the middle of the building and shout that Grace was dangerous. He did something quieter, something worse. He made people wonder. It started with a volunteer named Linda who had been helping at the front desk for years. She stopped me near the coffee station one morning and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Lewis," she said carefully, "is everything all right with the new janitor?" I looked at her. "Why wouldn't it be?" Linda hesitated. "Derek said he might have had some problems at another job." "What kind of problems?" She shook her head quickly. "I don't know. I just thought I should ask." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. "Grace has been respectful and helpful since the day he arrived," I said. "If Derek has a concern, he can bring it to me directly." Linda looked embarrassed. "Of course, I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by it." But she had meant something. Not because she was cruel. Linda was a kind woman. She had simply heard a warning from the man running the center, and like anyone else, she had taken it seriously. That was how Derek's whispers worked. By lunchtime, I noticed 2 staff members speaking more quietly when Grace walked by. A few parents watched him with a new kind of caution. One mother pulled her little boy a little closer to her side when Grace passed the waiting area with a trash bag in his hand. Grace noticed, too. He did not react. He did not confront anyone. He just kept his eyes down and continued working. That afternoon, I found Derek in his office sorting through invoices. I closed the door behind me. "What have you been saying about Grace?" He looked up slowly. "What do you mean Linda asked me whether he had problems at another job?" Derek leaned back in his chair. "I didn't say anything specific, but you said something. I said we should be careful. That is not the same thing as accusing someone." Careful of what? Derek folded his hands on the desk. "Mom, I don't want to upset you. Then don't speak to me like I'm a child. Tell me." He let out a long breath, the kind that made him look patient and reasonable. "I heard he had anger issues," he said. "That he got into an altercation at his last workplace." From who? Contact. Who? His eyes hardened for the briefest second. "I'm not going to give you names." "Then you have no right to spread it around this building. I am trying to protect the center." "No," I said. "You are trying to make people afraid." Derek stood up. His voice stayed calm, but I could hear the frustration underneath it. "You have no idea what kind of liability we have here. There are children in this building. There are elderly people. If something happens, everyone will ask why I ignored the warning signs." "What warning signs?" I demanded. "The man fixes broken doors, helps children, and works until dark. That is all I have seen." Derek gave me a sad little smile. "That's because you always want to see the best in people." For a moment, the words almost made me doubt myself. Then I remembered Malik in the boxing room. I remembered Grace holding the heavy bag steady, while a hurting boy learned how not to let anger control him. "I do want to see the best in people," I said. "But I also know when someone is trying to poison a room." I turned to leave. Behind me, Derek said, "Just don't say I didn't warn you." The words followed me into the hallway. That evening, I stayed late to finish paperwork for the pantry. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the center had grown quiet, except for the hum of old fluorescent lights. Around 7 o'clock, I realized I had left my umbrella in the boxing room. I made my way down the long corridor, behind the gym, past the storage closets and the staff lockers. The building always sounded different at night. Every pipe creaked louder. Every footstep seemed to echo. As I got closer to the boxing room, I heard voices. At first, I assumed Grace was speaking with one of the coaches. Then I recognized Derek's voice. I stopped near the doorway hidden behind the corner of the hall. The boxing room lights were off, except for one overhead lamp. Derek stood inside near the ring, holding his phone to his ear. "Yes," he said. "That's him." There was a pause, then Derek's voice lowered. "His name is Grace Morgan. He's the janitor." My hands tightened around the edge of the wall. Derek continued, "You'll meet him at the fundraiser. It's supposed to be a friendly sparring demonstration." Another pause. I could not hear the person on the other end, but I heard enough from my son. "No, you don't need to knock him out." His tone was flat, controlled. "Just push him. Get in his face, insult him, make him lose his temper." My heart began to pound. Derek paced slowly beside the ring. "If he throws the first real punch, that's all I need." The silence that followed felt unbearable. Then Derek said, "Yes, Travis, you'll be paid. Half before, half after." I pressed my hand over my mouth. For one terrifying moment, I could not move. My son was arranging something. Not a fundraiser. Not a harmless boxing event. A trap. Before I could step away, a floorboard creaked beneath my shoe. Derek turned sharply toward the doorway. I slipped back into the shadows just as he stepped out into the hall. He looked left, then right. For several long seconds, he stood there with his phone still in his hand. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. Finally, he went back inside. I did not wait for my umbrella. I walked quickly toward the front entrance, fighting the urge to run. But as I passed the maintenance closet, I saw Grace standing at the far end of the hall. He had a mop bucket beside him, but he was not moving. He had heard it too. His face was unreadable. When he saw me, he gave the smallest shake of his head silently, asking me not to say anything. I walked toward him. "Grace," I whispered. "What was that?" He looked toward the boxing room where Derek's voice had gone quiet. Then he looked back at me. "I don't know yet," he said, "but he mentioned you. He mentioned a fight." Grace's jaw tightened. "I heard enough. Then we need to confront him." "No," he said quickly. The urgency in his voice startled me. "Why not?" "Because he'll deny it. And because right now, he wants you to think I'm the problem." I searched his face. "Why would my son do this to you?" Grace looked down at the floor. For a moment, I thought he might finally tell me what he knew about my mother. Instead, he said quietly, "Maybe he's afraid of something. Afraid of what Grace met my eyes." I can't answer that yet. The next morning, I arrived early and found Derek in his office before anyone else came in. His door was slightly open. I was about to knock when I saw what was spread across his desk. Old yellowed documents, my mother's name, Helen Morgan, and a thick folder labeled Morgan Family Trust. Derek was turning pages quickly, his face tense and pale. Then he pulled out a handwritten letter, read a few lines, and shoved it back into the folder as though the paper had burned him. I stepped away before he saw me. But as I walked down the hall, one thought would not leave me. Derek was not afraid that Grace would hurt someone. He was afraid Grace would reveal something, and whatever it was, my mother had left the truth behind in writing. The fundraiser arrived on a Friday night under the kind of cold Ohio rain that made the streetlights shimmer on wet pavement. By 6 o'clock, Morgan Community Center was fuller than I had seen it in years. Families crowded through the front doors, wearing winter coats and carrying paper tickets. Local business owners stood near the refreshment table with plastic cups of coffee. A small neighborhood reporter set up a camera beside the gym entrance. Children ran past the folding chairs, excited by the bright banners, the music, and the boxing ring that had been cleaned until its old ropes almost looked new. Above the ring, Derek's banner hung in bold red letters, "Fight for the Future." I hated the words the moment I saw them. They made it sound as though the future of my mother's center depended on a spectacle. Still, I had come. Part of me had hoped I was wrong about Derek. Part of me had hoped that whatever I heard in the boxing room had an innocent explanation. Maybe Travis was simply an aggressive young fighter. Maybe Derek had spoken carelessly. Maybe I had misunderstood the whole thing because I was frightened of losing my son to someone I no longer recognized. That was the lie I kept telling myself. Grace stood near the back wall wearing a clean navy work shirt and dark slacks. He had spent the entire afternoon setting up chairs, hauling donated water bottles, and fixing a loose handrail near the side entrance. He looked exhausted, but he also looked calm. Too calm. When our eyes met across the gym, I walked toward him. "You don't have to stay tonight," I said quietly. He glanced toward the ring. "It's a community event. I work here. You know what Derek is planning. I know he wants something from me. Then leave." Grace looked at me for a moment, and there was something sad in his eyes. "If I leave now, he'll tell everyone I was afraid." "I don't care what he tells them." "But you will have to live with it," he said gently, "and he knows that." His words struck deeper than he probably intended. Derek knew exactly how to make me doubt myself. He had spent months doing it one careful sentence at a time. Before I could answer, the music in the gym became louder. Derek stepped into the ring, holding a microphone, wearing a tailored gray jacket, and the same confident smile he used whenever donors were watching. "Good evening, everyone," he said. The crowd applauded. Derek raised one hand toward the audience. "Tonight is about more than boxing. It's about resilience. It's about fighting for the place that has given so many people a second chance." Again applause. I stood near the edge of the crowd with my hands folded tightly in front of me. Derek began talking about the center's financial needs. He mentioned the roof, the plumbing, the old boiler system. He spoke about the future with just enough urgency to make people nervous and just enough hope to make them reach for their wallets. Then he smiled toward the far side of the gym, and because this community has always believed in lifting each other up, he said, "We have a special demonstration tonight." My stomach dropped. Derek turned fully toward Grace. "Grace," he called brightly, "come on up here." The gym became quiet. Grace did not move. Derek laughed lightly as though it were all harmless. "Don't be shy. Everyone wants to see you." A few people chuckled. Grace looked at me once. I saw the decision forming in his face before he took a single step. He knew that refusing would be used against him. Slowly, he walked toward the ring. My heart began pounding so hard I could barely hear the noise around me. Derek reached down and offered him a hand through the ropes. Grace ignored it and climbed in on his own. Then Travis Cole entered from the opposite side. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 26 or 27. Broad shoulders, close-cut blonde hair, a confident grin that looked practiced. He wore red gloves, black shorts, and a robe with the logo of a local fight gym stitched across the back. The crowd clapped for him. Travis bounced lightly on his feet and looked Grace up and down. "So, this is the guy," he said into the microphone Derek handed him. A few people laughed uneasily. Derek smiled. "Grace has been helping around the center. He has some experience in the ring." Grace's eyes narrowed. "I never said that," he replied. Derek kept smiling. "You mentioned you boxed once, a long time ago." "Well, tonight is just for fun," Derek said. "A little friendly sparring." "Nothing serious." Grace shook his head. "No." The single word carried through the gym. Derek's smile tightened. "Come on," he said. "It's for the kids." Grace stepped toward the ropes. "Then let the kids enjoy the event without using me as entertainment." Travis laughed. "What's wrong, old man?" he asked. "Afraid you'll get your uniform dirty?" The words were loud enough for everyone to hear. I saw several heads turn toward Grace. I saw phones lift in the air. I saw Derek watching him with that same stillness I had seen in the hallway outside the boxing room. waiting. Grace did not react. Travis moved closer. You spend all day cleaning this place, but you can't handle 3 minutes in a ring. My hands clenched. Derek, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, stop this. He looked down at me from inside the ring. Mom, it's only a friendly exhibition. Grace said no. Derek turned the microphone toward the audience, as if he wanted them to decide. Should we give Grace a chance to show us what he can do? A few people cheered. Others stayed silent. That was all it took. The pressure in the room became visible. Grace was no longer just a man refusing a fight. He was a janitor standing under bright lights, surrounded by wealthier people with phones raised, while my son made him look cowardly for wanting to walk away. Grace looked at Travis. Then he said, 3 minutes. No hard shots. Travis's grin widened. Derek stepped back, pleased. The bell rang. At first, it looked almost normal. Travis circled Grace with his gloves raised. Grace kept his hands up, but did not move aggressively. His feet were balanced light, controlled. He was clearly not the helpless man Derek had expected people to see. Travis threw a quick jab. Grace blocked it. Another jab. Grace leaned away. The crowd cheered. Then Travis stepped in closer and slammed a hard punch into Grace's ribs. The sound made me flinch. Grace's body tightened, but he did not strike back. I looked at Derek. He gave Travis the smallest nod. My breath caught. Travis came forward again. This time, he threw a hook toward Grace's head. Grace blocked part of it, but the glove still clipped his cheek. A red mark appeared near his eye. Derek! I shouted. He ignored me. It's boxing, Mom, he said without looking down. But it was not boxing. It was an ambush. Travis kept pressing forward, throwing heavier punches every few seconds. Grace defended himself, shifting backward, absorbing shots on his arms and shoulders. He could have hit back. Anyone with eyes could see that. His stance was too steady, his timing too precise, but he refused. Come on, Travis snapped. You gonna stand there all night? Grace said nothing. Another punch hit his ribs, then another landed against his jaw. The gym fell quieter with every blow. Even the people who had been cheering began to look uncomfortable. I pushed through the crowd toward the ring. Stop it, I called. This is over. Derek finally looked at me. His face was calm, almost cold. He agreed to spar. He agreed to a friendly match. He can quit whenever he wants. I stared at him. Grace was not quitting because he knew that was exactly what Derek wanted. Derek wanted him humiliated. He wanted him angry. He wanted him to either strike Travis or walk away defeated. Travis rushed forward again. This time, his glove caught Grace across the mouth. Grace stumbled back into the ropes. I heard someone gasp, and then I saw it. Derek lifted 2 fingers at his side, a small signal. Travis nodded almost imperceptibly and moved in harder. That was when I stepped forward, desperate to climb into the ring myself. But someone bumped into me from behind. My balance shifted. The silver chain around my neck caught against the edge of a folding chair. There was a sharp snap. My mother's locket fell to the floor. It skidded beneath the lowest rope of the ring and stopped near Grace's shoe. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Grace looked down. The locket had belonged to Helen Morgan. I had worn it since the day she died. It was small, oval-shaped, and worn smooth around the edges. On the back were 2 engraved initials, H.M. Grace bent slowly and picked it up. Travis lowered his gloves, confused. Derek went pale. Grace stared at the locket as though he had seen a ghost. Then he lifted his eyes to me. His face was bruised. Blood touched the corner of his mouth. But his voice when he spoke was soft and clear enough for the entire gym to hear. Helen Morgan, he whispered. My legs nearly gave out. Grace took 1 step toward the ropes. Then he looked straight at me and said the words that split my life in 2. Martha, sister. The crowd went silent. No applause, no music, no movement, only the sound of rain against the gym windows. And when I looked up at my son, Derek was no longer smiling. For several seconds after Grace called me sister, nobody in the gym seemed to remember how to breathe. Travis stood in the middle of the ring with his red gloves lowered, looking from Grace to Derek as though he had suddenly realized he had been hired for something far uglier than a fundraiser. The neighborhood reporter lowered her camera. A child near the front began to cry, and my son, my own son, stared at Grace with a look I had never seen on his face before. Fear. Then Derek recovered. "It's over," he snapped, stepping toward the ring. "This man is injured. He doesn't know what he's saying." Grace's eyes never left mine. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he said quietly. Derek turned toward the security guard near the gym doors. "Please escort him out. He has disrupted the event and frightened people." That was when something inside me finally broke open. "No." My voice was not loud at first, but it cut through the silence. Derek looked down at me. "Mom?" I said no. I walked toward the ring, my hands shaking so badly, I had to grip the ropes to steady myself. Grace held my mother's locket in his palm. The small silver oval looked almost black beneath the bright overhead lights. "That belongs to me," I said. Grace nodded and passed it through the ropes. Before I could take it, he turned it over in his hand. "My mother had one like this," he said. "Same shape, same engraving." My fingers closed around the locket. "You knew my mother?" I asked. Grace's face tightened with emotion. "I didn't know her the way I should have." Derek climbed into the ring, then his expression controlled, but his voice sharp. "This is ridiculous." He found an old necklace and decided to make up a story in front of a crowd. Grace looked at him. "You already knew," he said. Derek's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you think you know. You knew enough to hire me." A murmur moved through the crowd. Nicole stood near the refreshments table, one hand pressed to her mouth. Tessa was beside her, wide-eyed and pale. I looked at them, then back at Derek. "Is that true?" I asked. Derek did not answer. That silence told me more than any confession could have. Grace swayed slightly. The bruise near his eye had darkened, and blood touched the corner of his mouth. I turned toward the security guard. "Help him to the first aid room." Derek stepped in front of us. "Mom, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time." His eyes hardened. "You are letting a stranger manipulate you." I looked at my son, and for the first time that night, I did not see the little boy I had raised. I saw a man standing between me and the truth. "Then let him speak," I said. "If he is lying, we will know soon enough." Grace was taken down from the ring, and I followed him through the crowded hallway toward the small first aid room near the kitchen. Behind us, the fundraiser dissolved into whispers. I heard chairs scraping against the gym floor. I heard people asking one another what had happened. I heard Derek telling someone to end the music and clear the room. But none of it felt real. All I could think about was one word: sister. The first aid room was barely large enough for a cot, a metal cabinet, and 2 plastic chairs. Grace sat on the edge of the cot while a volunteer nurse cleaned the cut on his lip. He did not complain once. When she finished, she looked at me uncertainly. "Do you want me to call an ambulance?" Grace shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'll be all right." I waited until she left and closed the door behind her. Then I stood in front of him, holding my mother's locket so tightly it left an imprint in my palm. "Tell me the truth," I said. Grace looked down at his hands. For the first time since I had met him, he looked afraid. Not afraid of Derek, afraid of hurting me. "My adoptive mother died last winter," he began. "Her name was Louise Reed. She raised me in Cleveland. She was a good woman. She worked 2 jobs when I was little. Never let me go to bed hungry. Never made me feel like I was anything less than her son." His voice softened at the last word. "She always told me I was adopted. She never hid that. But she said my birth mother had been young, scared, and forced into a decision she never stopped grieving." I felt my throat tighten. "After Louise died, he continued her. Lawyer gave me a box she had kept for years. She told him to wait until she was gone before he gave it to me." Grace reached into the inside pocket of his work jacket. He pulled out a folded photograph, old and worn at the edges. "I carry this with me now," he said. He handed it to me. It showed a younger Helen Morgan standing outside a brick building in Cleveland. She looked barely older than a girl. Her hair was pulled back, and she was holding a baby wrapped in a pale blanket. My breath caught. The baby's face was turned away from the camera. But I knew my mother's smile. I had seen it in every old picture of her. That same gentle smile she wore whenever she thought nobody was looking. "That's her," I whispered. Grace nodded. "There were letters too," he said. "Letters your mother wrote, but never mailed. Some were addressed to a social worker. Some were addressed to me, even though she didn't know where I was." My eyes filled with tears. "What did they say?" Grace looked toward the wall, struggling to control his voice. She said she had been pressured by her father. He told her a child would ruin her future. He told her nobody would respect her if they knew she had a baby out of wedlock. I closed my eyes. My grandfather had been dead for decades, but suddenly I could feel the weight of his shadow in the room. Grace continued. She wrote that she was made to sign papers. She said she begged for more time. She said she tried to find me later, after she had moved to Dayton. His eyes returned to mine. "And she wrote about you." My heart stopped. "About me?" She said she had a daughter named Martha. She wrote that you were kind, that you had your father's eyes. She said she prayed one day you would understand why she kept so much pain hidden. I sat down slowly in the plastic chair beside the cot. All my life, I had thought I knew my mother. I knew her recipes, her favorite hymns, the way she folded towels, the stories she told about growing up poor. I knew how much she loved the community center, but I had not known she had carried a secret child in her heart. I looked at Grace again. "How did you find me?" He hesitated. "I started with the letters. Then I found an old obituary for Helen Morgan. It mentioned Morgan Community Center and her daughter Martha Lewis." My hands went cold. "So you came to Dayton?" "Yes. And you got a job here." Grace's expression changed. "That part wasn't my idea." The room seemed to narrow around us. "What do you mean?" He took a slow breath. "Before I ever came to Dayton, I received a call from a man named Derek Lewis." My son's name sounded wrong in Grace's mouth. "He said he had learned about the adoption records," Grace continued. "He said he was Helen Morgan's grandson. He told me he wanted to help me find the truth." I stared at him. "He contacted you first?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "He said the center needed maintenance help. He said working there would give us time to go through old files and see what could be found." Grace's voice lowered. At first, I believed him. I thought maybe he was doing something kind for his grandmother. Maybe he wanted to bring the family together. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. But then, Grace said he started asking questions that didn't feel right. He wanted to know exactly what documents I had, which letters, which dates, whether I had spoken to a lawyer. My stomach twisted. "And tonight," I asked. Grace looked toward the closed door. Tonight, he wanted me to look dangerous. He wanted people to believe I was unstable before I could tell anyone why I was here. I thought of the whispered rumors, the staged fight, the way Derek had smiled while Travis hit him. I looked down at the locket in my hand. My mother's initials caught the fluorescent light. Then I looked at Grace Morgan, the man my son had called nothing more than a janitor. And I understood something that made my blood run cold. Derek had not brought Grace into our lives to help us find family. He had brought him close so he could control him. The morning after the fundraiser, I woke before sunrise with my mother's locket still clenched in my hand. For a few seconds, I did not remember why I had slept in my clothes on top of the bed or why my living room lamp was still on. Then I saw Grace's photograph lying on the coffee table. My mother. A baby. A secret that had lived longer than she did. I sat there in the blue-gray light of morning and cried so quietly that even I could barely hear it. Not because Grace had done anything wrong. Not because I doubted what he had shown me. I cried because I kept thinking about all the times my mother had looked tired when I was young. All the times she had gone silent during old songs on the radio. All the birthdays when she stared out the kitchen window for a moment too long before smiling and returning to us. I had believed she was simply remembering her own hard childhood. Now I wondered if she had been remembering a son she had been forced to leave behind. At 9 o'clock, Grace arrived at my house with a paper bag from a bakery and a careful expression on his face. "You didn't have to bring breakfast," I told him as I let him in. "I wasn't sure if you had eaten." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. The man my son had tried to humiliate in front of the whole neighborhood was standing in my doorway, worried that I had skipped breakfast. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Derek had once placed papers in front of me and told me not to worry my head about business. Grace spread out the documents he had brought from Cleveland. There were copies of old letters, an adoption certificate, and photographs I had never seen before. Some of the pages were yellowed and soft around the edges. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, small, neat, and slightly slanted to the right. One letter began with words that made my chest ache. "My precious boy, I do not know where this letter will find you, or whether it ever will, but I need you to know there has not been 1 year that I have forgotten you." I could only read 2 lines before my vision blurred. Grace did not look at me while I cried. He gave me the dignity of pretending to focus on another paper. After a while, I wiped my eyes and said, "We need someone who can verify all of this." Grace nodded. "I know." He pulled a business card from the folder. The card belonged to Joan Caldwell. Under her name were the words, "Retired Legal Assistant." The address was in downtown Dayton. "Who is she?" I asked. Her name appeared in one of the letters Grace said. "She worked for a lawyer who represented your mother years ago." I studied the card. Caldwell, Price, and Hart. The same name I had seen on the envelope Derek had hidden in his locked drawer. A cold feeling moved through me. "Derek had papers from that law firm," I said. Grace looked up. "What kind of papers? I don't know. He wouldn't let me see them." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Grace folded the documents carefully and placed them back in the folder. "We should go see her," he said. Joan Caldwell lived in a small brick house near the edge of downtown, on a quiet street lined with maple trees and old porches. Her front yard was tidy, though the flower beds were covered for winter. A wind chime hung near the door and clicked softly in the cold breeze. I was nervous when Grace rang the bell. I did not know what we would find. I did not know whether Joan Caldwell would remember my mother. And I was afraid of hearing something that would make the pain worse. The door opened slowly. Joan was a small, white-haired woman in her late 70s, wearing a navy cardigan and reading glasses on a silver chain. Her expression was polite but guarded. "Yes, my name is Martha Lewis," I said. "My mother was Helen Morgan." The moment I spoke my mother's name, Joan's face changed. Not completely, just enough. A flicker of recognition. Then caution. "I remember Helen," she said. "What is this about?" Grace stepped forward, holding the folder against his chest. "My name is Grace Morgan," he said. "I believe Helen Morgan was my birth mother." Joan's eyes moved from Grace to me, then back to Grace. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she opened the door wider. "You both should come in." Her living room smelled like tea and old books. There were framed photographs on every surface, most of them of children and grandchildren. Joan led us to a small dining table where stacks of papers were arranged in perfect piles. "I retired years ago," she said as she poured tea into 3 cups. "But there are things you do not forget in this line of work." Grace placed the photographs and letters on the table. Joan put on her glasses and began reading. At first, she said nothing. Then she picked up the photograph of Helen holding the baby. Her hand trembled. "Oh, Helen," she whispered. I held my breath. "You remember this?" I asked. Joan looked at me with sad eyes. "I remember your mother coming to the office," she said, "not long after she moved to Dayton. She wanted to know if there was any way to find the child she had been forced to surrender." The word "forced" made my stomach twist. "She was trying to find him?" I asked. Joan nodded slowly, more than once. Your grandfather had power connections money. He made sure the adoption was closed tight. He wanted no trace of it. But Helen never stopped asking. Grace lowered his eyes. Joan continued reading through the letters, then opened a drawer in a wooden cabinet beside the dining room wall. I kept a few files from that period, she said. Not everything. The firm closed years ago, and most records were transferred or destroyed. But Helen asked us to preserve certain papers in a private trust file. She pulled out a thin gray box. On the front was a label written in faded ink. Helen Morgan Confidential Estate Addendum. My heart began pounding. Joan set the box on the table but did not open it immediately. There are legal procedures, she said carefully. I cannot simply hand this over because someone arrives with a letter. I understand, Grace said. But she added, looking at the locket around my neck, I can show you what Helen intended. She opened the box. Inside were legal documents, copies of correspondence, and a sealed envelope with my mother's name written across the front. Joan removed a document and read silently for several moments. Then she looked up at us. Helen amended the trust that governs Morgan Community Center, she said. My breath caught. The center, I asked. Joan nodded. She created a provision for any child who might later be legally identified as hers. She wanted that child to have a voice in protecting the center. Grace stared at her. What does that mean? He asked. Joan turned the paper toward us. It does not mean you automatically inherit everything, she said. It does not take anything from Martha. But if legal identity is confirmed, you would have the right to participate in major decisions involving the community center, especially the sale transfer or redevelopment of the property. I felt the room tilt. Derek's proposal, the back lot, the papers he wanted me to sign. Grace was not just a lost son from my mother's past. He was the one person Derek could not afford to let speak. Joan tapped another section of the document. Helen specifically wrote that the center should never be sold or altered for private profit without the agreement of all legally recognized beneficiaries. My hands began to shake. Derek knows about this, I said. Joan's expression hardened. He does. Grace Licker looked at her sharply. You spoke to him several months ago, Joan said. He came here asking questions about Helen's trust. He said he was trying to organize family records after Martha's husband passed away. I felt sick. What did you tell him? I asked. Very little, she said. But he was persistent. He asked whether Helen had ever had another child. He asked whether there were any unknown beneficiaries. I told him there were confidential matters and that he had no right to access them without proper authority. Grace went still. He knew, he said. Joan nodded. Yes. I believe he knew enough to be afraid. I thought of Derek hiring Grace, watching him, spreading rumors, setting up the fight. The truth settled over me like ice water. My son had not been trying to save Morgan Community Center. He had been trying to sell it before the one person who could stop him was recognized as family. Grace reached for the photograph of my mother holding him as a baby. His thumb rested gently against her face. She tried to find me, he said almost to himself. Yes, Joan replied. She did. I looked at him then, at the man who had spent his life believing he had been abandoned, and for the first time, I did not see him as a stranger carrying my mother's secret. I saw my brother. Once I understood why Derek had been so desperate to discredit Grace, I could no longer look at the center's finances with the same trusting eyes. For years, I had treated the paperwork as a burden Derek had taken off my shoulders. He knew the vendors. He knew the building contracts. He knew which grant applications needed to be filed and which donors needed a thank you letter. That was what I had told myself. But sitting in Joan Caldwell's dining room with my brother beside me, I realized something painful. I had not handed Derek responsibility. I had handed him access. The next morning, Grace and I went to Morgan Community Center before the staff arrived. The building was quiet when we entered through the side door. The hallways smelled faintly of floor cleaner and old coffee. For a moment, everything looked normal. The same bulletin boards, the same faded posters for tutoring programs, the same gym where children would be laughing by noon. But nothing felt normal anymore. Derek's office door was locked. That alone was not unusual. He had started locking it more often over the last few months. Still, when I stood in front of it, I felt something harden inside me. "This used to be my mother's office," I said. Grace stood beside me, holding a cardboard box filled with old trust documents Joan had copied for us. "I know," he said gently. I looked at the small brass nameplate on the door. Derek had replaced my mother's old one years ago. Director of Operations, Derek Lewis. I remembered the day he installed it. I had smiled proudly and taken a picture of him standing beneath it. Now I could barely look at it. "The financial records are stored in the main office computer too," I said. "And in the filing room." Grace nodded. "Then let's start there." We spent nearly 2 hours going through ledgers, invoices, grant summaries, and donation reports. At first, I did not understand what I was looking for. Numbers had never been my strength. But I knew enough to recognize patterns, and the patterns were wrong. There were donations from local churches and businesses that appeared in one report, but not another. There were maintenance payments listed twice. There were invoices for repairs that I did not remember approving. One entry showed a payment of nearly $12,000 to a company called Riverbend Property Services. I stared at it. "Do you know them?" Grace asked. "No," I said. "I've never heard of them." We searched through the folders. There was no detailed invoice, no repair order, no contractor notes, only a printed payment confirmation with Derek's approval attached. Then we found another payment, and another. Different company names, similar amounts, all approved by Derek. My hands began to tremble as I added them together. "Maybe they're legitimate," I whispered, though. Even as I said it, I knew I did not believe it. Grace did not rush me. He simply pulled a chair closer and helped me spread the pages across the table. For the next hour, we followed every number we could find. By late morning, the picture became clearer. Money from the center had not vanished all at once. It had been drained slowly, quietly in pieces, small enough that nobody would notice without comparing months of records. A few thousand here, a false repair charge there, a consulting fee with no contract attached. Derek had not made the center look financially weak because it was failing. He had made it weak. I sat back in my chair staring at the paperwork until the printed lines began to blur. "I raised him," I said softly. Grace looked at me but did not answer. He was such a sweet boy when he was little. He used to bring injured birds home in shoeboxes. He cried when Robert and I told him he couldn't keep them all. My voice cracked. "I don't understand how he became someone who could do this." Grace's expression softened. "Sometimes people don't become someone else," he said quietly. "Sometimes pressure just reveals what they were willing to do all along." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend Derek, but I could not. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, Grace asked me to come with him to the security office near the loading dock. A small television monitor sat on a metal desk beneath a shelf full of old cables and spare keys. Grace had already spoken to the night security guard, a quiet man named Harold, who had worked at the center for years. Harold looked nervous when he saw me. "Mrs. Lewis," he said, "I didn't know what to do with this." "What is it?" I asked. He glanced toward Grace. "Mr. Morgan asked me to pull the footage from the night before the fundraiser." Grace placed a small flash drive on the desk. "I remembered the camera near the back parking lot," he said. "The one by the loading entrance." Harold plugged it into the computer. The footage appeared on the screen. The date was 2 days before the fundraiser. The image was grainy and gray, but clear enough. Derek stood outside near the loading dock after dark. He was wearing his usual coat, his hands in his pockets. A few minutes later, Travis Cole walked into view. My stomach tightened. They shook hands. Then Derek pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and gave it to Travis. Travis opened it. Even on the blurry screen, I could see the shape of cash inside. He looked at Derek, said something I could not hear, and Derek answered. Then Travis smiled. The footage ended. I stared at the blank screen. "That proves it," I said. Grace looked troubled. "Not all of it?" I turned toward him. "What do you mean there's no audio?" Harold nodded. "That camera doesn't record sound." My heart sank. Derek could claim it was a payment for the fundraiser, a fee for Travis's appearance, a bonus for a boxing demonstration. He would lie. And because he had spent months quietly making people question me, some of them might believe him. I thought of Linda at the coffee station, asking whether Grace had caused trouble at his last job. I thought of staff members lowering their voices when I passed. I thought of how often Derek had spoken gently about my memory. "You don't understand how business works. You forget how expensive things are now. You're letting emotion get in the way." He had not been speaking carelessly. He had been building a case. Every time he called me confused, every time he suggested I was too emotional, every time he acted concerned about my age, he was laying another brick in the wall he planned to build around me, a wall where nobody would believe me. I sat down slowly in the chair beside the monitor. "He wants them to think I'm losing my mind," I said. Grace's face darkened. "Yes. He wants them to think I'm being manipulated by you." "Yes. And if I speak out about the money, he'll say I misunderstood the records." Grace crouched beside me so we were eye level. "You are not confused, Martha." The simple sentence nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, because nobody had said it to me in months. Derek had made me question things I had known my whole life. He had made me feel embarrassed for asking questions. He had made me worry that maybe I was becoming weak, forgetful, difficult. But looking at the grainy video of my son handing cash to the man who beat my brother in a ring, I felt something return to me. Not anger alone, clarity. I stood up. "We need copies of everything I said." Grace nodded. "The donation records, the invoices, this footage, every document that shows what he has done." And then what he asked. I looked through the small office window toward the hall where children would soon begin arriving. Then I thought of my mother, of the center she built, because she believed people deserved a place where they could be safe. "We find out how far Derek has gone," I said, because by then I knew the fight in the ring had never been about Grace. It had been a warning, and my son had only just begun his plan to take everything from me. Derek invited the family to dinner 2 nights later. He called me himself. "Mom," he said with that familiar softness in his voice, "we need to stop letting this situation tear everyone apart. Come over Sunday. Nicole is making roast chicken. We can talk like a family." For one foolish second, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the little boy who once brought home injured birds in cardboard boxes was still somewhere inside the man on the phone. I wanted him to say he was sorry. I wanted him to admit he had been scared, overwhelmed, desperate, anything that would explain why he had watched Grace get beaten in front of a room full of people. But then I remembered the security footage, Derek's hand reaching into his coat, the envelope of cash, Travis Cole smiling as he accepted it. So I said, "I'll come." Grace offered to drive me. I could tell he did not like the idea of me going alone. "You don't owe him another chance to hurt you," he said as we stood in my kitchen that Sunday afternoon. "I'm not going to beg for a chance," I replied. "I'm going because I need to hear what he says when the people closest to him are watching." Grace studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded. "Call me when it's over." Derek and Nicole lived in a quiet subdivision on the west side of Dayton, in a 2-story house with white siding, black shutters, and a front porch. Nicole decorated beautifully every season. I had helped them choose the curtains in the dining room. I had bought the kitchen table as a housewarming gift when Tessa was just 4 years old. That evening, it looked like the home of a happy family. Warm yellow light shone through the windows. The smell of rosemary and roasted chicken floated out when Derek opened the door. A neat row of coats hung in the entryway. I heard muted laughter from the dining room. But the moment Derek saw me, his smile felt too careful. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "I'm glad you came." "I'm sure you are," I replied. His eyes flickered. Then he stepped aside. The dining room table was crowded with relatives. Nicole's parents sat at one end. Two of Derek's cousins sat beside them. My cousin Patricia had come with her husband. Tessa sat quietly between Nicole and one of the cousins, her shoulders pulled tight beneath a pale blue sweater. Nicole rose when she saw me. "You look tired," she said softly. "I'm fine." She glanced toward Derek, then lowered her voice. "Please be careful tonight." Before I could ask what she meant, Derek appeared behind her. "Everyone's waiting," he said. Dinner began politely, too politely. People passed bowls of potatoes and green beans. Someone complimented Nicole's cooking. Someone else asked Tessa how school was going. She answered in short sentences and kept looking down at her plate. Derek did not bring up Grace immediately. That was the first thing that frightened me. He waited until everyone had eaten enough to feel settled, until the room had become quiet, until people were relaxed enough to believe they were safe. Then he set down his fork. "I know everyone has heard rumors," he said. The room went still. Nicole's hand tightened around her water glass. Derek looked at me with an expression of concern so convincing that years ago it would have fooled me. "This has been difficult for Mom," he continued. "She has been under a lot of stress since Dad died. And now this man, Grace Morgan, has come into her life with a story that none of us can verify." I felt my face grow warm. "He has documents," I said. Derek gave a small, patient sigh. "Mom, anybody can bring old papers and claim anything. He has letters written by my mother, and you know for certain they are real." "Yes, because you remember every detail of your mother's handwriting from 40 years ago." The question landed like a slap. A few people shifted in their seats. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Derek continued before I could answer. "I am not saying Grace is definitely lying. I am saying we need to be careful." He appeared out of nowhere. He came to the center. He got close to Mom. Then, suddenly, he says he has rights connected to the property. "He did not get close to me," I said, my voice rising. "You hired him." Derek paused. Just long enough. Then he looked down as if I had said something unfortunate. "Mom, I hired him through an agency. I did not know he would make these claims." "That isn't true," Martha Patricia said gently from across the table. "Maybe Derek is only trying to protect you." I turned toward her. "From what?" She looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, but you have been upset lately." The words hurt more than I expected. Not because Patricia was cruel. She had known me my whole life. She had attended my wedding. She had held Derek when he was a baby. But that was the terrible power of Derek's plan. He did not need to prove I was confused. He only needed the people around me to wonder whether I might be. Derek leaned back in his chair. "Grace was involved in a violent scene at the fundraiser," he said. "People saw it. The children were scared. He was attacked." I snapped. "He was in a boxing ring. Because you put him there." Derek shook his head. "No one forced him to step inside." I looked at Nicole. She still had not said a word. Her face was pale. Her eyes were fixed on her plate. "Tessa," Derek said suddenly, turning to his daughter. "You were there. Did Grace seem calm to you?" Tessa looked up sharply. Her eyes moved from her father to me. Then she looked down again. "I don't know," she whispered. Derek nodded as though that answer proved something. "He was bleeding," he said. Of course it was upsetting. I watched my granddaughter carefully. She was not confused. She was afraid. Her fingers were trembling beneath the tablecloth. Derek's phone buzzed beside his plate. He glanced at the screen, and for an instant, his expression changed. His jaw tightened. He picked it up quickly and turned it face down. Tessa saw it. I knew because she flinched. The dinner continued, but the room had changed. No one spoke freely anymore. Derek had done what he came to do. He had placed doubt inside every person at that table and let it spread quietly. By the time dessert was served, I could barely swallow. I stood up. I'm going home. Derek rose immediately. Mom, don't leave angry. I'm not angry, I said. That was not entirely true. I was angry. But beneath the anger was something colder. I was awake. You're trying to make everyone think I cannot tell the truth from a lie, I said. You're trying to make Grace look dangerous because you're afraid of what he knows. Derek's smile disappeared. For a brief second, his face showed nothing but rage. Then it was gone. You need rest, he said softly. I looked at him. No, Derek. You need to stop. I walked out before anyone could answer. The cold air hit my face as I reached the front porch. I had barely made it halfway down the walkway when I heard the front door open behind me. Mama Martha. I turned. Tessa stood on the porch, wrapping her thin cardigan around herself. What is it, sweetheart? She hurried down the steps and looked back toward the house before speaking. I need to tell you something. My heart began to race. Tessa, are you okay? She nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. A few weeks ago, Dad told me not to go behind the center after school, she whispered. But I forgot my art folder in the gym, and I went back. I waited. I saw him by the dumpster, she continued. He was burning papers in a metal trash can. The world seemed to narrow around us. Did you see what papers? She shook her head. No. But he got really mad when he saw me. He said it was old maintenance stuff and told me never to tell anyone. I reached for her hands. Tessa, you did the right thing telling me. She looked toward the house again. Is Dad going to get in trouble? The question broke something in me, not because I wanted Derek to suffer, but because his own daughter had learned to be afraid of the truth. I don't know what will happen, I said honestly, but none of this is your fault. Before she could say anything else, the front door opened again. Nicole stepped outside. She held a small white envelope in her hand. Tessa, she said quietly, go back inside. I'll be there in a minute. My granddaughter hesitated, then hugged me tightly and returned to the house. Nicole came down the steps slowly. For a moment, she looked as frightened as her daughter. Then she held out the envelope. I found this in Derek's desk, she said. Inside was a copy of a document. At the top in bold letters were the words, Power of Attorney. My name was printed beneath them. My signature was at the bottom. I stared at it. Then I felt the blood drain from my face. That is not my signature, I whispered. Nicole's eyes filled with tears. I know. I looked closer. The document gave Derek authority to make financial and property decisions in my name, including decisions involving Morgan Community Center. Has he used this? I asked. Nicole swallowed. I don't know everything, but I heard him on the phone last week. He said the sale would be finished in 10 days. 10 days. That was all the time we had. I folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I looked up at Nicole. My son had lied to me. He had staged a fight to destroy Grace. He had stolen from my mother's center, and now he had forged my name to take control of what was left. The dinner had been meant to make me feel small. Instead, it gave me exactly what I needed. Proof that Derek was no longer simply hiding mistakes. He was building a life on lies. I did not sleep that night. The forged power of attorney sat on my kitchen table beneath the yellow light over the stove. I must have read it 20 times, tracing my eyes over every line, every legal phrase, every place where Derek had tried to turn my own name into a weapon against me. The signature at the bottom looked close enough to fool someone who did not know me, but I knew my signature. I had written it on school permission slips, donation receipts, Christmas cards, medical forms, and every birthday check I had ever given Tessa. My handwriting had changed a little over the years, but it was still mine. The signature on that document was not mine. At 6 in the morning, I called Grace. He answered on the second ring. Martha. I need you to come over, I said, and bring Joan's number if you have it. He did not ask why. I'll be there in 15 minutes. By 7, Grace was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, reading the document with a stillness that made my chest ache. Joan Caldwell arrived an hour later in a wool coat, carrying a leather briefcase, and wearing the same serious expression she had worn when she opened my mother's trust box. When she saw the document, she took off her glasses and set them down carefully. "This is serious," she said. "I know," I whispered. "No, Martha. I mean criminally serious." The word criminal hung in the room. For years, I had defended Derek in my own mind. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he had made mistakes. I told myself he had grown desperate because the center needed money. But forgery was not desperation. It was a choice. Joan opened her briefcase and took out a notepad. "We need an attorney who understands trusts, property law, and elder financial exploitation," she said. "Not just someone who can send a letter. We need someone who can move quickly." "Do you know anyone?" Grace asked. Joan nodded. "There is a woman named Adrienne Brooks. She handled several difficult estate cases after the old firm closed. She is sharp, careful, and she does not scare easily." By 10 that morning, the three of us were sitting in a conference room at Brooks Legal Group in downtown Dayton. Adrienne Brooks was in her early 50s with a silver streak in her dark hair and a voice that was calm without ever sounding soft. Her office was simple but warm, with shelves full of legal books, framed certificates, and a bowl of peppermints on the table. She listened without interrupting while I told her everything. I told her about Derek's pressure to sell the back lot. I told her about the locked legal envelope. I told her about Grace's letters, the trust documents, and the staged boxing match. Then I placed the forged power of attorney on the table. Adrienne read it twice. "What did your son say this document was for?" she asked. "He never showed it to me," I said. "I found out about it from my daughter-in-law. And you never signed anything giving him authority over your property." "No." "Have you ever signed a power of attorney in the past?" "Not that I remember." Derek's voice rose in my mind at once. "You forget how expensive things are now. You don't understand how business works." For one terrible moment, I wondered whether he had counted on that exact uncertainty. Adrienne must have seen it on my face. "Martha," she said gently but firmly, "do not let anyone use age as a way to make you doubt facts. Either you signed it or you did not." "I did not," I said. "Then we start there." She placed the document to one side and looked at Grace. "And you are Grace Morgan." "Yes, ma'am." "You have adoption records, letters, and information from a former employee of the law firm that created the trust?" "Yes." Grace slid the folder across the table. Adrienne read through the documents for nearly 20 minutes. Nobody spoke while she did. At last, she looked up. "The trust provision is unusually specific," she said. "Helen Morgan wanted any legally confirmed child to have a voice in major property decisions involving the community center." "Can Derek sell the back lot without us?" I asked. "Not if this provision is enforceable and Grace's identity is legally verified. But we must act before the sale closes." "Nicole said 10 days, I said." Adrienne nodded slowly. "Then we do not have time to waste." She began making a list. First, we needed certified copies of Grace's adoption records. Second, we needed to preserve every piece of financial evidence from the center before Derek could destroy or alter it. Third, we needed an emergency injunction to stop the property sale. Fourth, we needed to confirm whether Derek had used the forged power of attorney for anything beyond the center. At that point, Adrienne asked a question that made the room go cold. "Does your son have access to your personal financial information?" I thought about the papers I had allowed him to organize after Robert died. My home insurance, my bank statements, the mortgage documents Robert and I had kept in the filing cabinet. "He helped me sort paperwork last year," I said slowly. Adrienne's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Bring me anything related to your house," she said. That afternoon, Grace drove me home while Joan stayed behind to help Adrienne review the trust papers. The entire ride, rain streaked the windows and turned the city into gray smudges. Neither of us spoke much. When we reached my house, I went straight to the filing cabinet in the hallway. The drawer stuck at first. Then I pulled harder, and it opened. Inside were years of records. Insurance documents, utility bills, Robert's old retirement statements, tax returns, and the folder marked Home. I carried it to the dining table. Grace sat beside me as I sorted through the papers. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then I found a notice from a lending company I did not recognize. The envelope had been opened. The letter inside was addressed to me. It thanked me for submitting a collateral verification package. My hands started shaking before I had even finished reading. Collateral, Grace said quietly. I looked up at him. What does that mean? His face tightened. It means somebody may have used your house to secure a loan. No, I whispered. Derek wouldn't. But the words died before I could finish them, because beneath that letter was another document, a preliminary loan agreement. My home address was printed at the top. The borrower was listed as Derek Lewis. The property offered as security was mine. For a moment, I could not breathe. The house where Robert had proposed to me in the backyard. The house where Derek had learned to walk. The house where my mother spent her last Christmas. My son had placed it on the line without telling me. Grace reached across the table but did not touch me until I nodded. Then he covered my hand with his. You're not alone now, he said. I looked at the paperwork again. For the first time, I understood that Derek was not simply trying to control the community center. He was trying to control me, my property, my memories, my future. And if I stayed quiet because he was my son, I would lose everything my mother and Robert had spent their lives building. I pulled my hand away gently and gathered the papers into a neat stack. Grace watched me. What are you going to do? He asked. I looked toward the front window where the rain was beginning to slow. Then I thought of Derek's face in the boxing ring, the smug certainty in his eyes when he believed he had made Grace look weak. I'm going to stop protecting him from the truth, I said. The next morning, I put on my coat, gathered the copies Adrian had asked me to preserve, and drove to Morgan Community Center before 8. I wanted to be there before Derek. I wanted to stand into my mother's office, look through the last of the financial records, and make sure nothing else disappeared before our attorney could file the emergency paperwork. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I knew something was wrong. The side entrance, the one I had used almost every day for 20 years, had a new silver lock on it. For a moment, I simply stood there in the cold, staring at it. My key did not fit. I tried it once, then again. Nothing. The old key that had opened that door through snowstorms, summer camps, food drives, funerals, and countless ordinary mornings had become useless overnight. I walked around to the front entrance. The same thing. New locks, new keypad, no way in. I pressed the buzzer beside the glass doors. After several seconds, Linda from the front desk appeared on the other side. The moment she saw me, her face fell. She opened the door only a few inches. Mrs. Lewis, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Why can't I get in? Linda looked over her shoulder before answering. Derek changed the locks last night. On whose authority? Her eyes filled with tears. He sent an email to everyone. I felt the air leave my lungs. What email? Linda hesitated, then reached beneath the desk and picked up a printed page. Her hands were trembling as she passed it through the narrow opening. I read it standing there in the cold. It was written in Derek's polished, professional tone. For the safety and stability of Morgan Community Center, Martha Lewis will be stepping back from all operational decisions effective immediately. Due to recent emotional distress and concerns regarding her ability to manage ongoing legal and financial matters, all staff are instructed to direct questions to Derek Lewis, Director of Operations. I read the words twice, then a third time. Stepping back. Emotional distress. Ability to manage. Every phrase was carefully chosen to sound concerned instead of cruel. That was Derek's gift. He knew how to wrap betrayal in polite language. He sent this to everyone I asked. Linda nodded. I didn't know what to do. Some people were confused. Some people are scared. And you? Her eyes met mine. I know you built this place with your mother. That almost made me cry. But I would not give Derek the satisfaction of breaking down outside the building he was trying to steal. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then I folded the paper, placed it in my purse, and stepped away from the door. As I turned toward the parking lot, I saw Grace's truck pull in beside mine. He got out quickly when he saw my face. "What happened?" I handed him the email. His jaw tightened as he read it. "He changed the locks," I said. "He told everyone I'm not capable of making decisions." Grace looked toward the building. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes. Not wild anger, not the kind Derek had tried to create in that boxing ring. It was controlled, deep, protective. "He can't do this," Grace said. "He already has. We call Adrienne." "We will." But I did not move. I stood in that parking lot, looking at the brick building my mother had opened with her own hands. I remembered being a girl and helping her tape construction paper leaves to the windows for the first fall festival. I remembered Robert lifting Derek onto his shoulders outside those doors when he was 5 years old. Now my son had shut me out. Not just from a building, from my own history. Grace stood beside me without speaking. Finally he said, "You can stay at my place for a few days until we know what he might do next." I looked at him. The offer was kind. I knew that, but something inside me stiffened. "No." "Martha, he forged your name. He used your home as collateral. He searched through your papers. We don't know how far he'll go." "I know, then let me help keep you safe." I looked back at the center. "I will not run from my own life." Grace was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, "but I'm not leaving you alone." When I returned home, I found the hallway filing cabinet open. At first, I thought I had forgotten to close it after going through the loan papers with Grace. Then I saw the folders. They had been pulled out, rifled through, and shoved back in the wrong order. Robert had always teased me for labeling everything too carefully. But I knew exactly where each document belonged. Insurance in the blue folder, taxes in the green folder, medical records in the white binder, home documents in the black file marked with a small gold sticker. Now the black file lay half open on the floor. Someone had been searching. My hands went cold. Grace stepped past me and checked the front window locks, then the back door. "Did you call the police?" he asked. "Not yet. You should." I looked at the messy drawer again. Part of me wanted to call immediately, but another part of me knew exactly what Derek would say. Mom is upset. Mom is confused. Mom probably misplaced things. He had prepared for this. He had built his story too carefully. "We'll document it," I said. "Take pictures. Then we call Adrienne." While Grace photographed the drawer and the disturbed papers, my phone rang. "Nicole." For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hello, Martha," she said. Her voice shook. "Can I come over?" I looked at Grace. He nodded once. "Come," I said. Nicole arrived 40 minutes later with Tessa beside her. The moment they stepped inside, I saw that something had changed. Nicole's hair was pulled back carelessly, like she had been crying or too nervous to care what she looked like. Tessa held her backpack against her chest, even though it was a Saturday. Neither of them sat down right away. Nicole looked at Grace, then at me. "I don't know how to say this," she whispered. "Just tell the truth," I said. Her face crumpled. "Derek has been in debt for years." The room went silent. Nicole wiped her eyes quickly. "It started with an investment. He said it was small. Then another one failed. Then he took out loans to cover the first loans. He kept saying he could fix it before anyone noticed." I sat very still. "He told me he was using the center money temporarily," she continued. "He said he was borrowing it until a deal went through. He promised he would replace every dollar." "Did you believe him?" I asked. "At first," she said. "I wanted to. I kept telling myself he was scared, not dishonest." Her voice broke on the last word. But then he started blaming everyone else. The center, the donors, you, Grace, me, anyone but himself. Tessa looked down at the floor. Nicole reached for her daughter's hand. I heard him on the phone one night, Nicole said. He said if you looked unstable, people would let him take control. He said he only needed enough time to close the sale. My stomach tightened. What exactly did he say? Nicole swallowed. He said, if Mom starts questioning everything, we make her look confused. People already expect an older woman to forget things. The cruelty of it landed harder than I expected, not because I had not suspected it, because hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Nicole looked at me through tears. I will testify, she said, about the power of attorney, about the debt, about what he said. Before I could answer, Tessa stepped forward. And I'll tell them about the papers. She said softly. Her voice was small but steady. The papers he burned behind the center. I saw him, and I heard him tell Mom not to worry because Grandma wouldn't understand what was happening anyway. I reached for her hand. You are very brave, I told her. She nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. I don't want Dad to hate me. My heart broke for her. You are not doing this to hurt him, I said. You are doing this because truth matters. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from Morgan Community Center. The subject line read, Emergency Board Meeting, Immediate Attendance Required. I opened it. Derek had scheduled a special board meeting for Monday morning. The purpose was stated in one sentence: to approve the proposed property transfer and establish temporary authority for Director of Operations. He was not slowing down. He was trying to finish everything before we could stop him. I looked at Grace, Nicole, and Tessa. Then I picked up the phone and called Adrienne Brooks. When she answered, I said, He's moving the sale forward. Her voice became sharp and focused. Then we move first. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. By the time Grace and I pulled into the parking lot of Morgan Community Center, every space near the front entrance was full. Board members' cars lined the curb. A few staff members stood in small nervous groups beneath the awning. Through the glass doors, I could see Derek moving between the folding chairs in the main meeting room. He looked composed. That was the part that unsettled me most. My son had forged my name, drained money from the center, used my house as collateral, and tried to turn the people I loved against me. Yet, there he was straightening a stack of folders as though he were preparing for an ordinary business meeting. Grace walked beside me without speaking. He wore a dark suit that Nicole had helped him choose the day before. The bruise near his eye had faded from purple to yellow, but I could still see where Travis Cole's glove had split his lip. Derek had wanted that bruised face to make Grace look dangerous. Instead, it reminded me of what my son had done. Adrienne Brooks met us near the entrance holding a thick legal binder under one arm and a black laptop case in the other. Joan Caldwell followed close behind, moving carefully but with a steadiness that made me admire her even more. Are you ready? Adrienne asked. No, I thought. No mother is ever ready to stand in a room and expose the truth about her own child. But I looked through the glass doors at the building my mother had given her life to create. Then I nodded. Yes, the board meeting room had once been the center's biggest classroom. My mother used to teach job readiness workshops there on Tuesday nights. Later, after she got older, she used it for sewing classes and holiday food drives. Now the room had been rearranged with a long table in front for the board members and rows of chairs behind it for staff and community guests. Derek stood at the head of the table. Nicole and Tessa sat together in the second row. Nicole's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Tessa looked pale, but when she saw me, she sat a little straighter. Derek looked up as we entered. For a brief moment, something crossed his face. Not guilt, annoyance. Then his professional smile returned. Mom, he said, I'm glad you decided to come. I wouldn't miss this, I replied. The chairwoman of the board, a retired teacher named Sandra Bell, called the meeting to order. Derek stood first. He began exactly as I expected. He spoke about financial hardship. He spoke about emergency repairs, unpaid bills, and the need to protect the future of Morgan Community Center. He used the same calm, concerned tone he had used in every conversation where he wanted people to doubt me. Then he clicked a remote. A video appeared on the screen behind him. It was footage from the fundraiser, but it was not the whole story. The clip began with Grace standing in the boxing ring. It showed Travis circling him. It showed Grace raising his gloves. Then, after a quick cut, it showed Grace stepping forward as Travis fell backward near the ropes. The video ended there. No context. No shots of Travis striking Grace first. No footage of Derek signaling from ringside. No audio of Derek pressuring Grace to get into the ring. Just a carefully edited image of my brother looking like the aggressor. A murmur moved through the room. Derek looked toward the board with sad, practiced concern. "This is why I have been worried," he said. "Grace Morgan has inserted himself into my mother's life during a vulnerable period. He has made claims about family history and trust authority, while also demonstrating behavior that raises serious safety concerns." My hands curled in my lap. Derek turned toward me. "Mom has been grieving for years. She has been under emotional stress. I believe Mr. Morgan has used that grief to manipulate her into thinking there is some conspiracy against her." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Years ago, I might have defended myself too quickly. I might have raised my voice or cried or pleaded for someone to believe me. That was what Derek expected. But I had spent too many nights questioning my own mind because of him. I was done giving him that power. When he finished speaking, I stood slowly. "My name is Martha Lewis," I said. "I have been part of this center since the day my mother opened it. I may be 63 years old, and I may be grieving my husband, but I am not confused." The room went still. I looked at Derek. "You have spent months telling people I am forgetful, emotional, and incapable. You said those things because you knew that once people doubted me, they would stop listening to me." Derek shook his head. "Mom, that isn't fair." "No," I said quietly. "What you did to this center wasn't fair." Adrian stood beside me. Before the board votes on any property transfer, she said, "We need to present evidence relevant to this matter." Derek's expression tightened. I don't see why Sandra Bell interrupted him. "You will have your chance to respond, Derek. Let her proceed." Adrian connected her laptop to the projector. "This is the unedited recording of the fundraiser," she said. "It was captured by the local reporter's camera and obtained in full after the event." Derek's face lost color. The video began. This time the sound filled the room. Everyone heard Derek call Grace into the ring. Everyone heard Grace refuse. Everyone heard Derek say, "It's for the kids." Then came Travis's insults, the mocking laughter, the pressure. The recording showed Grace agreeing only after Derek turned the crowd against him. And then, before the bell rang, the camera caught Derek leaning toward Travis at the side of the ring. His voice was low, but the microphone picked it up clearly. "Push him," Derek said. "Make him lose his temper." No one moved. The video continued. Travis hit Grace hard in the ribs. Grace stepped back. Derek gave the signal. Travis hit him again. Then came the moment everyone in the room had seen before, but now they saw what had led to it. Grace never threw the first punch. He never struck Travis. He only defended himself. When the video ended, the silence was heavier than any accusation. Derek stood frozen beside the projector screen. Adrian spoke again. "This footage directly contradicts Mr. Lewis's claim that Grace Morgan acted violently. It also shows that Mr. Lewis arranged a deliberate provocation in an attempt to discredit him publicly." Derek found his voice. "That video is being taken out of context." "No," I said. "You took the truth out of context." Joan Caldwell stood next. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the trust file, but her voice was clear. "Helen Morgan established a legal protection for Morgan Community Center," she explained. "She specifically stated that no sale or redevelopment for private profit could occur without the involvement of all legally recognized beneficiaries." She looked at Grace. Grace Morgan is currently undergoing formal verification as Helen Morgan's biological son. The evidence includes adoption records, letters, photographs, and documentation preserved by the original estate firm. Several board members looked toward Grace. He stood slowly. For a moment, I worried he would be overwhelmed. After everything Derek had done to reduce him to a job title, to a rumor, to a target, this was the moment he had every right to demand something. But Grace only looked at the room and said, "I did not come here to take anything from Martha." His voice was low but steady. "I came here because I spent my whole life believing my mother gave me away and forgot me. Then I learned she never stopped trying to find me. This center was her legacy. I will not let it be sold because someone wants to profit from it." I looked at him and tears filled my eyes. My brother had every reason to be angry, yet he was standing there to protect the woman he had only just met. Then Nicole rose. Derek turned toward her so quickly that the chair beside him scraped against the floor. "Nicole," he said, warning in his voice, but she did not sit back down. "I found a forged power of attorney in Derek's desk," she said. "It had Martha's name and a signature she never gave." Derek's face hardened. "Nicole, stop." She kept going. "He has been in debt for years. He used money from the center. He told me he could fix it. He said he only needed time to sell the property." Her voice broke, and he said if Martha questioned him, he would make people think she was losing her mind. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Derek stared at his wife as though he had never seen her before. Then Tessa stood. She was only 16, but in that moment, she seemed older than everyone in the room. "I saw my dad burning papers behind the center," she said. "He told me not to tell anyone. He said Grandma wouldn't understand anyway." Derek closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man watching his own lies collapse around him. Sandra Bell looked down the table at the other board members. Then she spoke slowly. "Effective immediately, Derek Lewis is suspended from all duties at Morgan Community Center, pending an independent financial and legal investigation." Derek looked up sharply. "No, you can't do that." "We can," Sandra said, "and we are." She continued, "The property transfer is canceled. No sale will proceed until the trust issues financial records and allegations of forgery are fully reviewed." Derek turned toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "You're really going to let them do this to me?" I looked at my son, the little boy who had once trusted me with injured birds, the man who had tried to take my home, my mother's center, and my voice. My heart broke, but I did not look away. "No, Derek," I said. "You did this to yourself." The meeting ended without anyone speaking to Derek for several minutes. Board members gathered their folders in silence. Staff members moved quietly toward the doors, avoiding his eyes. Nicole sat beside Tessa in the second row, holding her daughter's hand so tightly their fingers had turned white. Grace remained near me, not touching me, but close enough that I knew he would not let me face what came next alone. Derek stood at the front of the room beside the projector screen, staring at the blank wall where his edited video had just played. The room that had once echoed with my mother's laughter, sewing classes, job workshops, and children's voices now held the sound of his breathing. Finally, Sandra Bell spoke. "Derek, you need to turn over your office key's computer access and any center documents in your possession. The investigator will contact you." He looked at her as if she had slapped him. "You can't treat me like a criminal." Sandra's face did not soften. "We are not making a final determination today. We are protecting the center while the facts are reviewed." Derek laughed once sharply. "The facts," he said. "You all just listened to a woman who is grieving a man who appeared out of nowhere and my own wife turning against me." Nicole stood slowly. "I did not turn against you," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "You turned away from all of us a long time ago." Derek looked at her, and for a moment, I saw something almost human cross his face. Pain. Then it hardened into anger. "Take Tessa home," he said. Nicole shook her head. "No." The word was quiet, but it changed the room. Derek's jaw tightened. He looked at Tessa, then at me, then at Grace. His eyes settled on my brother last. "This is what you wanted," he said to Grace. "You came here and destroyed my family?" Grace did not raise his voice. "No," he said. "I came here looking for mine." Derek's face twisted. Then he pushed past the empty chairs and headed toward the hallway. "Derek," I called. He stopped, but did not turn around. "Go to your grandmother's office," I said. "I want to speak with you." For a few seconds, I thought he might refuse. Then he walked out. The old office was at the end of the main corridor, past the trophy case and the framed photographs of children who had grown up in the center over the years. I had not been inside since Derek changed the locks. Adrian had arranged for the locks to be opened after the board meeting, but walking down that hallway still felt strange. I had spent so much of my life there, yet my own son had made me feel like an intruder. Grace started to follow me. I turned to him. "I need to do this alone." His expression tightened with concern. "Martha, I'll be all right." He looked toward the office door where Derek had disappeared. Then he nodded. "I'll be right outside." I stepped into my mother's old office. The room looked almost exactly as it had the last time I saw it, except for the disorder on Derek's desk. Papers were stacked unevenly. A coffee cup sat half full beside a closed laptop. A family photo of Derek, Nicole, and Tessa faced the wall as though someone had knocked it over and never bothered to fix it. Derek stood by the window with his back to me. Outside, gray clouds hung low over the playground he had been ready to sell. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Are you happy?" The question hit me so hard that I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I'm heartbroken." He turned around. His eyes were red, but I could not tell whether he had been crying or simply fighting anger. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I told the truth. "You made me look like a monster. You made yourself look like one." His mouth tightened. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. Then Derek walked to the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. He removed a thin folder. I recognized it immediately. The same cream-colored folder I had seen months ago in his office, the one he had locked away when I asked about it. He set it down on the desk between us. "I found this before Grace ever came here," he said. My hands went cold. Inside were copies of old letters, adoption information, and notes from the trust file. "You knew," I said. Derek looked down. "Yes." The word was barely audible. "How long?" "Months." I felt something inside me sink. All those months, every time he told me not to worry, every time he brought papers for me to sign, every time he spoke to me as if I were too old to understand what was happening. He had known. "You found out that my mother had another son," I said. "You found out Grace existed. And instead of telling me, I panicked. You hired him." Derek looked up sharply. "I didn't know what else to do. You hired him to work here as a janitor. I needed to know what he had." My throat tightened. "He was your uncle. He was a stranger." "No," I said. "He was family." "You knew that before I did." Derek walked away from the desk and ran both hands through his hair. "You don't understand what was happening," he said. "The center was drowning. I had creditors calling. I had bills piling up. I had people expecting me to fix everything. You stole from the center? I was going to put it back. You used my house as collateral. I was trying to buy time. You forged my signature." His face changed. Not much, but enough. The excuse left him. I stepped closer. "You told people I was confused," I said. "You made them think I couldn't trust my own memory. You set Grace up to be beaten in front of a crowd. You were willing to destroy him so nobody would listen to him." Derek's eyes filled. I didn't want it to go that far, but it did. I was scared. So was I. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the little boy I had once held when he had nightmares. I saw the teenager who cried at Robert's funeral, and promised me he would always take care of me. That memory was the cruelest part, because love does not disappear just because someone hurts you. Sometimes it stays even when it has nowhere safe to go. Derek's voice cracked. Mom, please? I stood still. The investigation, he said. The police. The board. You can stop this. No, I said. His face crumpled. Please, I made mistakes. I know I did, but I'm your son. I know you are. Then help me. The room seemed to shrink around us. He was asking me to do what I had always done. Protect him. Explain him. Clean up after him. Make his pain smaller so he would not have to face it. For years, I had mistaken that kind of protection for love. But standing in my mother's office, with the community center she built hanging in the balance, I finally understood the difference. Love should guide someone toward truth. It should not hide the damage they cause. I love you, Derek, I said. He stared at me. I will probably love you for the rest of my life. Nothing you have done can erase the fact that you are my son. His shoulders lowered slightly, as though he thought I was about to forgive everything. Then I continued, but loving you does not mean I will lie for you. His breath caught. It does not mean I will interfere with the investigation. It does not mean I will ask everyone to pretend you did not steal from this center. It does not mean I will sacrifice Grace Nicole Tessa or myself to protect you from consequences you chose. Mom, no. My voice shook, but I did not take it back. You wanted me to look weak because you thought weakness would make me easier to control. But I am not weak. I am hurt. I am disappointed. I am grieving the son I thought I still had. But I am not weak. Derek looked away. Tears ran down his face now. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You don't fix it by asking me to erase it, I said. You fix it by telling the truth, by returning what you can, by accepting what comes next, by becoming someone who does not need to hurt others to save himself. He stood there for a long time. Then slowly, he picked up the folder from the desk. I found those letters first, he said almost to himself. I knew if Grace had a right to the trust, the sale would be over. So, you decided to make him look like a liar. I thought if people were afraid of him, nobody would care what he said. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth. Not a misunderstanding. Not panic alone. A choice. Derek walked toward the door. When he reached it, he stopped. I'm sorry, he said without turning around. I wanted those words to heal something. They did not. Not yet. I hope one day you mean that enough to change, I said. Then he opened the door and walked out. Grace was waiting in the hallway. He did not ask what happened. He simply stood beside me as I looked into the empty office at the desk where my son had hidden the truth for months. For the first time, I knew that justice would not feel like victory. It would feel like loss. But it was still necessary. 3 days after Derek walked out of my mother's office, Grace called me just after breakfast. Martha, he said softly. Joan found something. His voice carried the kind of careful weight that told me this was not another legal paper or financial record. What did she find? I asked. A letter, he said. One Helen wrote for me. Joan thinks it was meant to be given to me if I was ever found. For a moment, I could not answer. Then I looked towards the mantel in my living room where my mother's photograph stood beside Robert's. Helen was smiling in that picture, holding a tray of Christmas cookies, as if the world had never broken her heart. Where are you? I asked. At her grave, Grace said. I thought maybe you should read it with me. I put on my coat without changing out of my house shoes at first. Then I stopped, looked down, and almost laughed at myself. It was a strange thing, the way grief could make you forget the smallest details. By the time I reached the cemetery, the morning sun had pushed through the gray clouds. The ground was damp from the rain the night before, and tiny drops clung to the bare branches above the rows of headstones. Grace stood beside my mother's grave with his hands in the pockets of his dark coat. He had brought flowers, not roses or anything fancy, just a small bundle of white carnations and yellow daisies. They looked like something she would have liked, he said when I walked up. I nodded. They do. For several minutes, we stood without speaking. My mother's headstone was simple. Helen Morgan, beloved mother friend and servant of her community. I had chosen those words after she died. Back then, I thought they said everything. But now I knew they did not even come close. Grace held out a cream-colored envelope. It was old, the edges softened by time, and my mother's handwriting was written across the front. For my son, if this ever finds him. I stared at the words until they blurred. You can open it, Grace said. No, I whispered. You should. He looked down at the envelope. Then he shook his head. She was your mother, too. The sentence was simple, but it changed something inside me. Not because I had forgotten Helen was my mother, because Grace was finally allowing himself to say it. Our mother. I placed my hand over his for a moment. His fingers were cold beneath mine. Then we opened the letter together. The paper trembled slightly as Grace unfolded it. He began reading out loud, but after the first few lines, his voice broke. So I took the letter gently and continued. My precious boy, if these words ever reach you, I pray you will know that there has not been a day I have forgotten you. I have carried the memory of you through every season of my life. I have imagined your face at birthdays, at graduations, at every Christmas morning, when I placed one extra ornament on the tree and told myself it was foolish to hope. I stopped. Grace looked away toward the trees. I continued reading. My father told me I had to choose between my child and my future. I was young, frightened, and surrounded by people who convinced me I had no power. I signed papers I did not understand because I believed I had no other choice. But I need you to know this giving you away was never the same as giving up on you. Tears slid down my face. The words on the page seemed to breathe. I searched for you when I could. I asked questions I was told not to ask. I kept records I was told to destroy. And when I was finally able to build a life of my own, I created a place where children and families could feel safe because I knew what it meant to lose someone you loved to silence and fear. Grace closed his eyes. Morgan Community Center. The building had not just been my mother's dream, it had been her apology, her way of creating a home for people who had nowhere else to go. I read the final part of the letter slowly. If you ever meet your sister Martha, please tell her that I loved her with all my heart. Tell her I was not always brave enough, but I tried to become brave for her. And tell her that I hoped more than anything that my children might find one another and build something kinder than the pain that separated them. The letter ended there. No final explanation. No perfect answer. Just my mother's hope written in ink decades before either Grace or I knew the other existed. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then Grace sat down on the small stone bench near the grave and pressed both hands against his face. I used to think she abandoned me, he said quietly. I tried not to care, but I did. I sat beside him. I know. I told myself I was fine, he continued. Louise loved me. She gave me a good life. But there was always this part of me that wondered what was wrong with me, why someone would give up a baby and never look back. His voice grew rough. I thought maybe I wasn't worth coming back for. I turned toward him. Grace, I said you were always worth coming back for. He looked at me. She tried, I said. She was trapped in a world that taught women to be ashamed of surviving things they never should have been forced to survive. But she tried. Grace nodded, though his tears kept coming. I wish I had known her, he said. So do I. I thought of the woman who had packed my lunches, braided my hair, and scolded me for leaving dishes in the sink. I thought of the mother I had loved and the frightened young woman I had never known. For the first time, I understood that both could be true. My mother had loved me deeply, and she had carried wounds she never had the freedom to name. She wasn't weak, I said softly. Grace looked at me. No, I continued. She was scared. There's a difference. He looked back at the headstone. Then, after a long silence, he said, I've been thinking about leaving Dayton. The words hit me harder than I expected. Leaving? He nodded. Once the attorneys finish what they need to finish, there may not be much reason for me to stay. I don't want to make things harder for you. Your family is already hurting. Derek may hate me forever. He may, I said honestly. Grace gave a sad smile. I never came here to take anyone's place. You haven't taken anyone's place. I don't want to be the reason things fall apart. I looked at him carefully. Grace, things did not fall apart because you came here. They fell apart because Derek built his choices on lies. He said nothing. I reached for his hand. You are not a problem that needs to leave town. His eyes met mine. You are my brother. For a second, he looked stunned. Then his face crumpled in a way that made him seem younger than his 58 years. My sister, he whispered. Yes, I said. Your sister. We sat there holding hands beside our mother's grave until the wind picked up and moved through the bare branches above us. Later that week, Nicole brought Tessa to my house. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, at first both of them unsure whether they were welcome. But I opened my arms. Tessa ran into them before I could say a word. She cried against my shoulder quietly. At first, then harder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. You were scared, I said, smoothing her hair. You were a child trying to survive a situation adults created. Nicole stood nearby with tears in her eyes. I should have spoken up earlier too, she said. You should have, I replied. She nodded, accepting it. But you spoke when it mattered, I added. That means something. We did not pretend everything was fixed. I did not tell Nicole that one brave decision erased the months she had stayed silent. I did not tell Tessa that her father's choices would somehow stop hurting because we loved her. Healing was not pretending the wound had never happened. Healing was learning how to live honestly after it did. Derek had sent me 2 messages by then. The first said, I'm sorry. The second said, I don't know what to do. I read both. I did not answer either one. Not yet. Maybe someday I would. Maybe someday he would do the hard work of becoming someone who deserved a reply. But for now, I had boundaries to protect. I had a community center to save. And I had a brother who had spent a lifetime believing he had no family left. When Grace left my house that afternoon, he paused at the front door. You really want me to stay? He asked. I looked at him. Not because of the trust I said, not because the center needs you, not because I feel sorry for you. He waited. I want you to stay because you're family. Grace nodded slowly. Then he smiled. Not the polite, careful smile I had first seen from him in the hallway at Morgan Community Center. This one was different. It looked like hope. 6 months later, Morgan Community Center opened its doors again. The morning of the reopening, I stood across the street with a cup of coffee warming my hands and looked at the building my mother had once saved with nothing but faith, stubbornness, and a stack of handwritten donation letters. The bricks were still old. The front steps still had their cracks. The sign above the entrance had been repainted, but it was not shiny or expensive. It looked like itself again. And that mattered to me. For months, the center had been closed for repairs audits and legal review. The board brought in an independent financial team. Every account was examined. Every invoice Derek had approved was reviewed. Every payment connected to the fake companies was traced. The truth was worse than I had wanted to believe. Derek had taken money from the center over a period of nearly 2 years. Some of it went to cover failed investments. Some went toward personal loans. Some had been moved through accounts he thought nobody would ever connect to him. But they did. The investigation confirmed the forged power of attorney too. It confirmed that Derek had tried to use my house as collateral without my permission. And it confirmed that the proposed sale of the back lot had been designed to cover debts he had created himself. The board removed him permanently from the center. The sale was canceled. The property was protected under my mother's trust, and for the first time in months, I could walk through those doors without wondering what had been hidden from me. Derek did not go to prison. Not because I saved him from consequences, but because he eventually cooperated. His attorney worked out a repayment agreement, and he entered a court-approved financial counseling program. He had to repay what he could. He had to face the people he hurt. He had to live with the fact that trust could not be restored with one apology. That was not easy for me. There were days I wanted to drive to his house and demand answers he could never give me. Why was I not enough for you to tell the truth? Why did you think you could take my home? Why did you let your daughter become afraid of you? But I learned that some questions do not heal you when they are answered. Some questions only keep you tied to the pain. So I stopped asking. Derek and I spoke once a week, sometimes less. We met in public places, a small cafe, a park bench, the diner where Robert used to take him for pancakes after Little League games. I never pretended everything was fine. It was not. But I did not slam the door completely shut either. I told him, "You are my son. I will always want you to become better. But you do not get to come back into my life as if none of this happened." He cried when I said it. So did I. That was the hardest kind of love I had ever given. Not the love that rushes into rescue. The love that steps back and says, "You must save yourself now." As for Grace, he did not leave Dayton. He stayed. The first time he walked into the reopened boxing room, he stood near the entrance and looked around quietly. The old ring had been repaired. The worn blue mats had been replaced. Fresh lights hung from the ceiling. A new mural covered one wall painted by local high school students. It showed children of every age and background standing together beneath the words, "Strength is control." Grace stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled. The board asked him to lead a new youth boxing and mentorship program. At first, he refused. He said he was only a janitor, that someone with more credentials should do it. But I reminded him of Malik. I reminded him of the boy who had learned that anger did not have to control his hands. "You were never just a janitor," I told Grace. "That was only the job Derek wanted people to see." Grace eventually agreed. The program became the heart of the center. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, children filled the boxing room. Some came because they wanted to learn how to throw a punch. Some came because they were angry. Some came because their parents worked late and needed somewhere safe for them to be. Grace taught them all the same thing. He taught them how to wrap their hands carefully, how to stand with balance, how to breathe before reacting, how to walk away from a fight when walking away was the braver choice. And every time he spoke, the children listened. One afternoon, I stood outside the boxing room and watched him work with a group of boys. Malik was there too. He had grown taller over the past 6 months. He was helping a younger child tie his gloves. Grace walked between the students, correcting their posture with patience. "Keep your chin down," he said. A boy nodded. "Don't swing because you're angry," Grace continued. "Swing because you've learned control." The boy looked confused. Grace smiled. "Anybody can throw a punch. Not everybody can choose not to." I leaned against the doorway, and for a moment, I imagined my mother standing beside me. I imagined Helen seeing the building still alive, seeing the children, seeing Grace, seeing me. Maybe she would have cried. Maybe she would have apologized. Maybe she would have simply smiled, that tired, loving smile I remembered from every childhood photograph. At the reopening ceremony, the gym was packed. Families filled the folding chairs. Former volunteers returned. Local businesses brought food. The mayor sent someone from his office, but the real guests of honor were the children who had spent years growing up inside those walls. Nicole stood beside me near the front entrance. Tessa was with her, wearing a bright yellow dress and smiling in a way I had not seen since before the fundraiser. She had started therapy with her mother. Nicole had too. They were still healing. We all were. But Tessa no longer looked afraid whenever her father's name came up. She was learning that loving someone did not mean carrying their choices on her shoulders. That lesson took adults a lifetime to learn. I was glad she was learning it sooner. When Grace stepped into the ring to welcome everyone, the room erupted in applause. He looked embarrassed by it. That made me smile. The same ring Derek had used to try to humiliate him was now filled with children wearing gloves, laughing, cheering, and waiting for their coach to speak. Grace took the microphone. I spent most of my life thinking, strength meant surviving alone, he said. But I was wrong. Real strength is letting good people stand beside you. Real strength is telling the truth, even when it hurts. And real strength is choosing to build something better than what hurt you. The gym became silent. Then he looked toward me. Martha, he said. I stepped closer to the ring. He held out his hand, and I took it. For a second, the room blurred through my tears. Then Grace smiled at me and said, Sister. This time the word did not break me. It healed something. I looked around the gym, at Nicole, at Tessa, at Malik, at the children practicing in the ring, at the community center my mother had built to give people a second chance. My family had not returned to what it used to be, and maybe that was for the best, because what we had before was built on silence. What we had now was built on truth. Kethuk Fan Mui Lum by Huk Kwuk Sung. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who know exactly where to hurt us. They know our fears, our memories, and the places where our hearts are soft. That is why betrayal from family can feel heavier than any wound caused by a stranger. But this story taught me something I will never forget. Love does not mean accepting mistreatment. It does not mean staying silent while someone lies, steals, manipulates, or tries to make you doubt your own mind. Love without truth becomes a prison. Love without boundaries becomes permission for someone to keep hurting you. I loved my son before he betrayed me, and I loved him afterward. But I finally understood that protecting him from consequences would not save him. It would only teach him that he could destroy other people and still be rescued. Grace taught me something too. A person's job title, appearance, age, or place in society does not tell you who they are. The man my son tried to reduce to just a janitor became the person who helped save my mother's legacy. He showed more dignity in one painful night than Derek showed in months of planning. And my mother's secret reminded me that people carry stories we may never fully understand. Sometimes the people we think were weak were simply surviving in a world that gave them no safe choices. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved deeply? And where are you watching from today? I would truly love to know. Please like this video, subscribe for more emotional family stories, and remember this, you can love someone and still choose to protect yourself. 6 months later, Morgan Community Center opened its doors again. The morning of the reopening, I stood across the street with a cup of coffee warming my hands and looked at the building my mother had once saved with nothing but faith, stubbornness, and a stack of handwritten donation letters. The bricks were still old. The front steps still had their cracks. The sign above the entrance had been repainted, but it was not shiny or expensive. It looked like itself again. And that mattered to me. For months, the center had been closed for repairs audits and legal review. The board brought in an independent financial team. Every account was examined. Every invoice Derek had approved was reviewed. Every payment connected to the fake companies was traced. The truth was worse than I had wanted to believe. Derek had taken money from the center over a period of nearly 2 years. Some of it went to cover failed investments. Some went toward personal loans. Some had been moved through accounts he thought nobody would ever connect to him. But they did. The investigation confirmed the forged power of attorney too. It confirmed that Derek had tried to use my house as collateral without my permission. And it confirmed that the proposed sale of the back lot had been designed to cover debts he had created himself. The board removed him permanently from the center. The sale was canceled. The property was protected under my mother's trust. And for the first time in months, I could walk through those doors without wondering what had been hidden from me. Derek did not go to prison. Not because I saved him from consequences, but because he eventually cooperated. His attorney worked out a repayment agreement, and he entered a court-approved financial counseling program. He had to repay what he could. He had to face the people he hurt. He had to live with the fact that trust could not be restored with one apology. That was not easy for me. There were days I wanted to drive to his house and demand answers he could never give me. Why was I not enough for you to tell the truth? Why did you think you could take my home? Why did you let your daughter become afraid of you? But I learned that some questions do not heal you when they are answered. Some questions only keep you tied to the pain. So I stopped asking. Derek and I spoke once a week, sometimes less. We met in public places. A small cafe, a park bench, the diner where Robert used to take him for pancakes after Little League games. I never pretended everything was fine. It was not. But I did not slam the door completely shut either. I told him, "You are my son. I will always want you to become better. But you do not get to come back into my life as if none of this happened." He cried when I said it. So did I. That was the hardest kind of love I had ever given. Not the love that rushes in to rescue. The love that steps back and says, "You must save yourself now." As for Grace, he did not leave Dayton. He stayed. The first time he walked into the reopened boxing room, he stood near the entrance and looked around quietly. The old ring had been repaired. The worn blue mats had been replaced. Fresh lights hung from the ceiling. A new mural covered one wall painted by local high school students. It showed children of every age and background standing together beneath the words, "Strength is control." Grace stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled. The board asked him to lead a new youth boxing and mentorship program. At first he refused. He said he was only a janitor, that someone with more credentials should do it. But I reminded him of Malik. I reminded him of the boy who had learned that anger did not have to control his hands. "You were never just a janitor," I told Grace. That was only the job Derek wanted people to see. Grace eventually agreed. The program became the heart of the center. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, children filled the boxing room. Some came because they wanted to learn how to throw a punch. Some came because they were angry. Some came because their parents worked late and needed somewhere safe for them to be. Grace taught them all the same thing. He taught them how to wrap their hands carefully, how to stand with balance, how to breathe before reacting, how to walk away from a fight when walking away was the braver choice. And every time he spoke, the children listened. One afternoon, I stood outside the boxing room and watched him work with a group of boys. Malik was there too. He had grown taller over the past 6 months. He was helping a younger child tie his gloves. Grace walked between the students, correcting their posture with patience. "Keep your chin down," he said. A boy nodded. "Don't swing because you're angry," Grace continued. "Swing because you've learned control." The boy looked confused. Grace smiled. "Anybody can throw a punch. Not everybody can choose not to." I leaned against the doorway, and for a moment, I imagined my mother standing beside me. I imagined Helen seeing the building still alive, seeing the children, seeing Grace, seeing me. Maybe she would have cried. Maybe she would have apologized. Maybe she would have simply smiled that tired, loving smile I remembered from every childhood photograph. At the reopening ceremony, the gym was packed. Families filled the folding chairs. Former volunteers returned. Local businesses brought food. The mayor sent someone from his office, but the real guests of honor were the children who had spent years growing up inside those walls. Nicole stood beside me near the front entrance. Tessa was with her, wearing a bright yellow dress and smiling in a way I had not seen since before the fundraiser. She had started therapy with her mother. Nicole had too. They were still healing. We all were. But Tessa no longer looked afraid whenever her father's name came up. She was learning that loving someone did not mean carrying their choices on her shoulders. That lesson took adults a lifetime to learn. I was glad she was learning it sooner. When Grace stepped into the ring to welcome everyone, the room erupted in applause. He looked embarrassed by it. That made me smile. The same ring Derek had used to try to humiliate him was now filled with children wearing gloves, laughing, cheering, and waiting for their coach to speak. Grace took the microphone. I spent most of my life thinking strength meant surviving alone, he said. But I was wrong. Real strength is letting good people stand beside you. Real strength is telling the truth, even when it hurts. And real strength is choosing to build something better than what hurt you. The gym became silent. Then he looked toward me. Martha, he said. I stepped closer to the ring. He held out his hand. I took it. For a second, the room blurred through my tears. Then Grace smiled at me and said, "Sister." This time, the word did not break me. It healed something. I looked around the gym, at Nicole, at Tessa, at Malik, at the children practicing in the ring, at the community center my mother had built to give people a second chance. My family had not returned to what it used to be, and maybe that was for the best, because what we had before was built on silence. What we had now was built on truth. Ket thuk fan muilam, by Huk sung. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who know exactly where to hurt us. They know our fears, our memories, and the places where our hearts are soft. That is why betrayal from family can feel heavier than any wound caused by a stranger. But this story taught me something I will never forget. Love does not mean accepting mistreatment. It does not mean staying silent while someone lies, steals, manipulates, or tries to make you doubt your own mind. Love without truth becomes a prison. Love without boundaries becomes permission for someone to keep hurting you. I loved my son before he betrayed me, and I loved him afterward. But I finally understood that protecting him from consequences would not save him. It would only teach him that he could destroy other people and still be rescued. Grace taught me something too. A person's job title, appearance, age, or place in society does not tell you who they are. The man my son tried to reduce to just a janitor became the person who helped Aimsa, my mother's legacy. He showed more dignity in one painful night than Derek showed in months of planning. And my mother's secret reminded me that people carry stories we may never fully understand. Sometimes the people we think were weak were simply surviving in a world that gave them no safe choices. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love deeply? And where are you watching from today? I would truly love to know. Please like this video, subscribe for more emotional family stories, and remember this: you can love someone and still choose to protect yourself.